Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final episode of the CISL Africa G20 podcast series. It has been an absolute pleasure running the podcast and engaging on several relevant discussions. I would also like to say many thanks to the team, Jonathan Ziful and Jonathan Vanker. I am Sikho Luthango, the CISL Senior Research Associate at CSL Africa. Today's podcast will discuss what the Values 20, also known as the V20 initiative, is and what its role is in shaping the South African G20 presidency. It will also illuminate what values underpin the Values 20 and why these values are important for sustainability in particular. Moreover, we will discuss how these values can be integrated into policymaking while balancing long-term sustainability goals as well as social needs. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final episode of the CISL Africa G20 podcast series. It has been an absolute pleasure running the podcast and engaging on several relevant discussions. I would also like to say many thanks to the team, Jonathan Ziful and Jonathan Vanker. I am Sikho Luthango, the CISL Senior Research Associate at CSL Africa. Today's podcast will discuss what the Values 20, also known as the V20 initiative, is and what its role is in shaping the South African G20 presidency. It will also illuminate what values underpin the Values 20 and why these values are important for sustainability in particular. Moreover, we will discuss how these values can be integrated into policymaking while balancing long-term sustainability goals as well as social needs. Today, I am joined by Professor Thabani Mlilo. He is currently a senior associate here at CISL Africa. He is also the managing director of Moahi Sustainable Solutions, a boutique sustainability advisory company, and is also an adjunct professor at the University of Cape Town Chemical Engineering Faculty, Minerals to Metals Initiative. He has over 23 years experience in the sustainability field, and Thabani is also the co-lead of the Sustainable Development Advocacy Stream for the Values 20 initiative that is under the South African G20 presidency, and he is a member of the African Union Technical Working Group on Model Law on Mineral Resources Development. Thabani, what a bio. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sikho. Thanks for having me.
So, Prof, what is the V20 and which values underpin it? And how can values support South Africa's G20 theme, solidarity, equality, and sustainable development?
Thanks, Sikho. So the V20 or the Values 20 is a subset. It's a working group that runs parallel to the G20. And its mandate is to bring to focus values-based leadership and value-centered leadership as part of the contribution to the G20 presidency, and really around how leadership, the type of leadership required to implement the mandate of the G20. It's underpinned by a number of values that coincide with the broader themes of the G20, and that is Ubuntu, equity, ethical governance, agency, and accountability. I think those values and those themes really resonate with how South Africa has approached the G20 and bring to bear the type of leadership that's required to actually implement all the mandates that the G20 has.
Mm-hmm. And how can these values, as you said, dignity, Ubuntu, and equity, be practically embedded into leadership practices to ensure environmental sustainability while also addressing systematic social inequalities?
Yeah, so I think where it really starts is the intentionality of design. So for every nation, most of our nations, in South Africa, of course, our Bill of Rights really entrenches these values. But in every sovereignty, you will see the threads of these values be underpinned. So it really starts with that national sovereignty and intentionality. But then it needs to make its way into policy. It needs to make its way into social norms, so your normative values, and then some practical aspects with regards to how leaders lead within our nations, whether it's corporate or political leadership.
And Prof, in contexts like Africa, where the immediate needs and particularly social needs like poverty reduction, inequality, and jobs may conflict with long-term environmental goals, how can value-based leaders make ethical decisions that are able to balance both?
That's a really good question. And I think oftentimes we present these seemingly conflicting paradigms, but in fact, in many ways, it is a false dichotomy. I think the very basis of V20 style leadership and values based leadership means that you can hold both these things at the same time. It's not binary. I think the focus of what we're trying to say is that, especially within the sustainable development framing, is that you can have both. And what we're saying is that a real leader, an ethical leader, and a value-centered leader doesn't weigh one against each other, but tries to see how we integrate these things for broader social, economic, and environmental development. And that is really part of what we're saying, is that in a world where we have all this conflict and lack of diplomacy and a breakdown of our traditional diplomatic engagement norms, we're saying that the types of leaders that we really need hold both of these things in tension and see how we integrate them for the best solution for everyone involved.
Mhm. And what kind of accountability mechanisms should be built into values based leadership frameworks to ensure leaders remain transparent and responsible for both environmental stewardship and social justice outcomes?
I think where it really starts is around the framing of values and what values mean within a societal or organizational context. So, some kind of values charter, but then we need to then from there give license to the normal stakeholders, the communities, to be able to do some kind of very visible assessment of their leaders in a very public way. I think the other thing is around ethics auditing, understanding that against that values charter, against the norms that the community has set about, there is some way that leaders are held accountable. And then there needs to be reporting. There needs to be a way that we transparently report on the performance of our leaders in a public and transparent way. And I think if we can incorporate some of those things into how we do business, how we do government, I think that starts to embed that structure around ethical leadership.
And, Prof, in terms of leaders guided by values like solidarity and agency, in which they foster inclusive participation, especially of marginalized groups in shaping part. Okay, I need to redo that question. Okay, so Prof, how can leaders guided by values like solidarity and agency foster inclusive participation, especially of marginalized groups, in shaping policies and practices for sustainability development, which is quite relevant, especially in the African context?
So from a mining example of this type of context where you are balancing power dynamics with the desire to be inclusive, what I would say is that the first aspect is valuing inclusive participation. If it's not valued, if it's just a tick box exercise, then whatever measures that you do, whatever initiatives that you plan are not potent at all. They're impotent. So initially, it starts with valuing participation, and then once you value that participation, you need to then put in place the mechanisms to draw that type of participation, meeting people where they are. You need to actually listen and action whatever concerns, whatever perspectives, whatever insights come from that participation. And then it needs to actually make sense in terms of the implementation. So stakeholders need to be able to see their input in policy and programs and implementation. The mining example that I was going to use is around this free prior informed consent, which is really designed around the inclusivity of engagement, particularly of indigenous groups who are normally marginalized. So that framing that those types of systems are important in terms of implementing values-based programs.
So, Prof, this brings us to our final question. What strategies can ensure that the aspirational values that you speak of in the V20, like fairness, justice, and ethical governance, don't become just words in charters, but consistently lived out in environmental and social sustainability initiatives, especially policy at both the local, national, and even global levels?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and I think for the V20 and the programs that we have in place. So this year really has been about advocacy. So how do you spread the word and bring this notion to public attention? I use a phrase from my home language, Isindebele, where we talk about "Ukuzinuka amakhwapha," smelling your own armpits, just to see like where are we? And I think that's been what this year is. The V20 for us doesn't just end here when we hand over the presidency of the G20 to America. We have a 3-year program in which some of this moves from being aspirational to being embodied. And we're looking to see and have these various ends where we begin to embody this into real tangible ways. And I think that's what you're talking about here. And we're looking at all aspects of society to see for us as South Africans, for us as a continent, actually, as Africa, because we're holding this presidency and custodianship for the whole continent. Where are some of these pain points? Where are some of these historical areas where perhaps we haven't done as well as we should? But what are these aspects that then these levers for societal development, for societal cohesion that we need to turn in order to make sure that we're living the Africa that we want? And that's where we're focusing. So it's really around very practical things that go from policy to plans, to narratives. So a lot of storytelling that goes on in terms of communication, and at the grassroots, actually catalyzing our communities to say, let's hold our leaders accountable. Um, let's hold corporate leaders, political leaders accountable for this. And
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our